Okay, in this final part of Chapter 19, I want to, after having covered the business cycle in Part 1, the kind of the broad strokes of what GDP looks like in Part 2, I want to finish it off by talking about why economists distinguish nominal GDP from real GDP. So, in the case of nominal GDP, what we're looking at, right, is we're not controlling for changes in prices. So, essentially, if I want to measure GDP, all I'm doing is just taking all the stuff that is purchased in a year and adding it all up. But the problem with that is that I could actually be producing the same amount of stuff, but just because it costs more, my GDP would increase, right? So, as an example, right, I produce, let's say, 10 computers a year at $1,000 a piece, right? Then, right, my economy would show I have a $10,000 GDP. But if the price of those doubles to $2,000, GDP for that year would then be $20,000, making it seem as if I'm actually producing twice as much stuff, when in fact I'm not. I'm more concerned about the quantity than I am the price. Hence the reason why I want to look at real GDP. In the case of real GDP, I don't allow the price to change. I have a base year price. So in the case here, right, if nominal GDP can change because of either price changing or the quantity changing, real GDP can only change if the quantity changes. And what then becomes useful then, right, just to kind of draw this out here, is that I can then construct something known as the GDP deflator, which would be a way that I can then talk about actually what the price change is. And the way that I would then calculate that is that for a given year, I would take the nominal GDP over the real GDP and multiply it by 100. What that's going to give me is a GDP deflator number. To the extent then that I've calculated in a whole series of GDP deflator numbers, I can then calculate the percentage change in those deflators, allowing me to actually see what the price change actually is. So, right, as the example here then, if you're looking at the typed up lectures, right, if you look at something like on the bottom of page 9, and I just want to just highlight this here for you. Again, you should, I hope that you're downloading these. But essentially, right, what you can see here is that I've established year 1 as my base year. This is on the bottom of page 9. You can see that my quantity is increasing, as is my price, which would mean that my real GDP would be increasing because the quantity is in fact increasing, but that the nominal GDP is changing as well. And then what I do then is I then take that ratio of the nominal GDP to the real GDP and multiply it by 100. In this case, in year 1, the deflator number is 100. In fact, always in the base year, the deflator number will be 100. But look at what happens in year 2. I would now have, in this case, 1440 as my nominal GDP, divided by 1200, which is my real GDP. Right, so in this case, sorry, I'm just doing the calculation here. Right, I would have a deflator of about 120. Now, what does that mean? So my deflator number for year 1 was 100. Now my deflator number for year 2 is 120. I can take the percentage change between those 2 years, 20%, and I would see that actually prices had changed by 20%. Look at that, they in fact had. In this case, it's really easy to see because there's only one price. It increased from $10 to $12. So I can see with my deflator numbers, I can track the changes in the prices. Something that'll be useful for us when we start to look at chapter 20. Okay. I just want to make sure here that I've covered everything else for this chapter that's significant. I have. Okay. So that's going to conclude this discussion of the GDP. And starting to then talk about the changes in the prices, which is going to be our lead-in to the next chapter, chapter 20, where I'll talk specifically about prices and unemployment.